Well, tonight it's back to Baker Street. Back to that unlikely London of the 19th century where high adventure awaits all who would seek it, in a hansom cab or under a gas lamp in an Inverness cape. For tonight we pay tribute to the most wonderful member of that most wonderful world. A gentleman who never lived and who will never die.
Sherlock Holmes never lived because he was nothing more than a figment of the imagination of doctor-turned-writer Arthur Conan Doyle. But it is also true that literature's greatest detective will never die, because his character is kept alive through the performances of dozens of actors on stage, screen, television, radio and record. Some inspired, some hopelessly miscast, they have taken the character from the printed page and breathed life into him. The best of these performers are now permanently identified with Sherlock Holmes, and none more so than the late Basil Rathbone.
I think, personally, perhaps that was part of the success of our little venture in the Sherlock Holmes stories, was that we all loved the people that we played. Holmes is a much more important man than just a detective, just the analyzer of crimes. He was a very remarkable man. I've said to my wife once, you know, the one thing I should dread more than anything in the world would be to find myself at a dinner party seated next to Sherlock Holmes, because he'd frighten the daylights out of me.
Rathbone's strength, it seems to me, was that, first of all, he looked exactly like the Sidney Paget illustrations. He had the great Rathbone profile.
Geoffrey Richards, reader in history at Lancaster University.
He's got that marvellous, incisive, whiplash Rathbone voice, and also the necessary touch of ham, which any successful interpreter of Holmes must have.
I did admire very much and adored dear old Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes.
Actor Peter Cushing.
I think one's helped greatly by the script. I think the thing is, Conan Doyle is so very specific about, particularly about the pipes, for instance, what kind of pipes Holmes used for different moods.
Peter Cushing played the part of Holmes, it seems to me, with the elegance, authority and iron will which he brought to his best roles in the Hammer films.
I really wouldn't like to have lunch with Holmes, but I'd rather have lunch with Watson.
TV's current Sherlock Holmes, Jeremy Brett.
I think he'd be very peppery and probably not talk and be very difficult. He'd probably leave before the lunch was over and I'd have to pay for it.
Jeremy Brett, in the Granada TV series, has emphasised the actor-manager side of Holmes. He's the first one really to have played him as an actor manqué. You expect him almost to take a bow at the end of his cases.
Among others who have given distinguished performances as Holmes are Raymond Massey, Robert Stevens, Douglas Wilmer, Ian Richardson and Christopher Plummer, while less likely portrayals include that of American actor Stuart Granger, British comedian Peter Cook, and sometime James Bond Roger Moore. And it's interesting that great theatrical knights such as Sir John Gielgud, Sir Cedric Hardwicke and Sir John Clements all took up the pipe and violin at some point in their careers. So perhaps, as Geoffrey Richards believes, there is an inspirational link between Sherlock Holmes and the theatrical tradition.
Watson says, the stage lost a great actor in you when you took up criminal investigation. And Holmes, throughout the stories, loves disguise. He also loves coup de théâtre, producing the lost jewel from some unlikely place and flummoxing people. And my own view is that one of the inspirations is Sir Henry Irving, the greatest actor-manager of the 19th century. We know that Conan Doyle had seen his performances from as early as the 1870s, later on wrote a play for him called The Story of Waterloo. And I think that there is also in the appearance of Irving something of the aquiline suggestion that goes into Holmes.
Steady on, Watson. I can never resist a touch of the dramatic.
So how did this remarkable character come into being? Well, it all began in the late 1880s.
Pray, be precise as to details.
Yes, of course, I'm sorry. It was in December 1887 that a London magazine, Beaton's Christmas Annual, price £1, published a detective story by Arthur Conan Doyle called A Study in Scarlet. Written in the character of Army Doctor John H. Watson, lately returned from serving Queen and country overseas, it contains one of the most famous of all fictional meetings.
Well, I want you to meet Dr. Watson, Holmes. Watson, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
How are you? You've been in Afghanistan, I perceive.
These were the very first words I ever heard uttered by my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
A Study in Scarlet was well received, but it was the appearance of a series of short Sherlock Holmes stories in the monthly Strand magazine beginning in 1891 that made Doyle and his creation famous, and what's more, provided at least one filmmaker with a subject for speculation.
Here's an advance copy of Strand magazine. They've printed the Red-Headed League.
Very impressive.
Would you like to see how I've treated it?
I can hardly wait. I'm sure I shall find out all sorts of fascinating things about the case that I never knew before.
Just what do you mean by that?
Oh, come now, Watson. You must admit you have a tendency to over-romanticize. You've taken my simple exercises in logic and embellished them, embroidered them, exaggerated
I deny the accusation.
You have described me as 6'4", whereas I'm barely 6'1".
A bit of poetic
You
license.
saddled me with this improbable costume, which the public now expects me to wear.
That is not my doing. Blame it on the illustrator.
That illustrator was Sidney Paget, who created Holmes' striking appearance, the tall, lean, hawk-like figure that has subsequently served as a model for so many actors. Following the success of the stories, the Strand magazine commissioned more, but Conan Doyle was tiring of Holmes, and in The Adventure of the Final Problem, published in 1893, he had Holmes grapple with his arch-enemy, Professor Moriarty, and plunge both hero and villain into a watery doom in the Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland, a monumental struggle that was later recreated by John Gielgud and Orson Welles. It was to be 8 years before Doyle's admiring public could read another story about Sherlock Holmes. Telling of an adventure that occurred before his ill-fated trip to Switzerland, it was to become his most celebrated story and the basis for innumerable films. The title? Well, maybe a clue would help.
Well, let me see. What can I show you? This, of course, is Baskerville Hall. Is that a clue for you?
Yes, of course. The Hound of the Baskervilles.
There was no sign of physical violence on the body whatsoever, but close by were footprints. Enormous, unnatural, unworldly footprints. Mr. Holmes, they were the footprints of a gigantic hound.
What's that? Where's it coming from?
There.
No. There. The hound. Come on, Watson, quick. Look! Sir Henry! Watson, the lantern.
In the same year that the fearful hound prowled the crags and mires of Dartmoor, Sherlock Holmes assumed tangible life when a play described as the greatest triumph of the London season opened at the Lyceum Theatre.
Each generation did produce its definitive, its famous Holmes, and the first one is William Gillette. He gave it the first three-dimensional reality, and people wanted it. The business of the costume and the catchphrases and the pipe, the deerstalker, they were all to be seen on the posters. The familiar profile emerges on theatre posters.
William Gillette was also responsible for two singular embellishments to the Holmes image. The curved calabash pipe, allegedly used because the actor could rest the bowl on his chest, thereby avoiding unnecessary strain on his teeth, and the line never actually said in the stories, but since used by every actor playing Holmes.
Elementary, my dear Watson, elementary.
Finally giving in to public demand, and to a record fee of $5,000 a story, Arthur Conan Doyle brought Holmes back to life in 1903 in The Adventure of the Empty House, and the thrill-filled adventures began once more.
Gentlemen, the game's afoot. Put that pistol down.
No, not till I've used it. You'll break no more hearts, Charles Milverton, as you've broken mine. You hound. You filthy hound!
Great heavens, Holmes! Quiet, man, he's done for.
And she's got away, thank heaven.
Who was that woman, Holmes?
Surely you know that face, Watson.
Not the Duchess of...
Never mention names, Watson.
In 1905, 2 years after Holmes' return, the first film version of his exploits appeared, with silent screen actor Maurice Costello in the title role. He was to be succeeded by, among others, John Barrymore, Eiley Norwood, Arthur Wantner and Clive Brooke. Through 200 or so film versions, Sherlock Holmes has reached an even wider audience than had read the original stories, and his unique deductive powers have become world famous.
The fact is, I'm a professional thinker, Doctor.
A thinker?
Certainly. I piece things together, you see. Just as a logician could infer the possibility of an Atlantic or a Niagara from a single drop of water without having seen or heard of either of them, so I build rare edifices of deduction from the observation of a few simple facts.
Oh, come home.
No, it's the truth, I assure you. Yes, I have a trade all my own, Watson. The only one in the whole world.
I am a consulting detective.
One must always observe the small facts upon which huge inferences may depend. How could you possibly guess?
I never guess. It is destructive to logic.
You have come by train, I see, this morning.
You know me, then?
No, but I observe the second half of a return ticket in the palm of your left glove.
There has been a murder done, and the murderer was a man. He was more than 6 feet high, was in the prime of life, had small feet for his height, wore coarse, square-toed boots, and smoked a Trichinopoly cigar.
I see from your right forefinger that you make your own cigarettes. Feel free to do so.
Holmes' analytical process never fails to amaze us, as it invariably amazed poor Dr. Watson, here played by Nigel Bruce, and invited by Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes to deduce the character of one Dr. Mortimer from a walking stick left in their rooms.
What do you make of it, Watson?
Why should I make anything of it? The fellow came to see you.
Ah, but what kind of a fellow? Let me hear you reconstruct him from his walking stick by our usual method of elementary observation.
Well, I should say that Dr. Mortimer is a successful man, well esteemed.
Good, excellent.
I should say that he does a great deal of his visiting on foot, because the iron ferrule is worn down.
Perfectly sound.
Let's have a look at this inscription.
Perhaps, Nigel Stock, you'd be good enough to read it to Peter Cushing.
To James Mortimer, MRCS, from his friends of the CCH. CCH. I should guess that to be the something Hunt. I should say that he is an elderly country practitioner who does much of his visiting on foot.
Watson, you excel yourself.
Has anything escaped me?
Almost everything, I'm afraid.
Really, Ian Richardson?
The man is certainly a country practitioner, and he walks a good deal.
Well, then I'm right.
To that extent. But a presentation to a doctor is much more likely to come from a hospital than from a hunt. And the letter CC very naturally suggests Charing Cross Hospital.
Well, yes, perhaps.
I would also say that the good doctor is amiable, unambitious, absent-minded, and, yes, owns a dog.
A dog?
Teeth marks.
All of which is too much for Nigel Stock.
Oh, come now, Holmes, you take too much license.
Do I? Our caller was amiable enough to receive this stick as a token of esteem. Only an unambitious man abandons a London career for the country. And only an absent-minded one leaves his stick and not his visiting card when he comes to see you.
Do you concur with Peter Cushing's deduction, Basil Rathbone?
Unless I'm mistaken, Dr. Mortimer will call on us again in a few moments.
Rubbish, Holmes. Rubbish. How the devil can you deduce that?
Well, as he left his stick, isn't it reasonable to presume that he'll come back and get it?
Dr. Mortimer, sir.
Not everyone, it has to be said, treats the process of deduction quite so seriously.
Who on earth can that be?
I'd say it was a middle-aged doctor, hailing from Dartmoor. Name probably Mortimer.
How did you deduce that, Watson?
Well, that's what he told me when he made an appointment this morning.
Peter Cook and Dudley Moore as a somewhat odd Holmes and Watson. Although the good doctor is frequently baffled by his friend, he always has his own unique role to play.
You may not be luminous yourself, but you are a conductor of light. Some people, without possessing genius, have a remarkable power of stimulating it.
Watson, you are the whetstone for my mind.
I am lost without my Boswell.
In the books, we see Holmes through Watson's eyes. Everything we know about him comes through Watson. Watson revered Holmes, calling him the best and wisest man I've ever known, but was also irritated by him.
Dash it, Holmes, I do wish you'd tell us what all this is about.
It's a human kind of relationship.
Well, Holmes, what do you make of it? Do you think there's anything in it? Good heavens, you're not going to start scratching on that infernal thing, are you?
Dear old Watson.
Nigel Bruce really has quite a lot to answer for in his impersonation of Dr. Watson. Nigel Bruce was a very lovable actor. and in the right kind of part was marvellous, couldn't have been bettered. But he played Watson as a buffoon, as a harumphing, silly ass, who actually got more buffoonish as the series went on, until, in the end, he was virtually certifiable.
Holmes! How could you play such a trick on me? I'll never forgive you for this, Holmes.
Among those who've attempted to exercise rather more restraint in playing Watson are Finlay Currie, Nigel Stock, Sir John Mills and James Mason.
Here you had an actor of genius conveying this sense of an ordinary, decent, solid citizen, from time to time exasperated by this quirky, brilliant, original mind who he'd been teamed up with.
Holmes, I wish you'd refrain from cleaning your pipe out with my hypodermic needles.
It's a great pity he only played the part once.
I shall smoke a pipe or two before I retire.
Well, I'll keep you company.
No, old chap. We're grappling with a dark intention, and I have a sense of some vague outline. No, thank you. I would prefer my own company tonight.
Well, of course. If a fellow's not wanted...
The relationship between Holmes and Watson seems to me to reflect exactly the close male friendships that were characteristic of the 19th century. And you can understand how they came about, because 19th century middle-class and upper-class England was essentially a man's world. Women had a very restricted role to play, and indeed you could go through your life hardly ever meeting a woman.
A woman? You amaze me, Holmes. Why a woman?
You could go to an all-male prep school, an all-male public school, an all-male university college, and then enter your all-male profession, the army, the law, the church, the civil service. They were all male preserves, and then in the evening you went to your gentleman's club, so you need never see a woman.
What a very attractive young woman. Is she? I did not observe.
How old would you say she is?
Now beware, old fellow. Emotions are antagonistic to clear reasoning.
Holmes, there's something positively inhuman in you in time.
The client is to me a mere factor, a unit in a case.
One can't apply such logic to a lovely lady.
My dear Watson, the most winning lady I ever knew was hanged for poisoning her 3 small children for their insurance money.
You've given the reader the distinct impression that I'm a misogynist. Actually, I don't dislike women. I merely distrust them. The twinkle in the eye and the arsenic in the soup.
For every rule there is one exception.
To Sherlock Holmes, she was always the woman.
The woman, Watson. Irene Adler.
She is a lovely woman, Watson. With a face that a man might die for.
Face a man might die for. Unusual language for you, Holmes.
A metaphor, Watson, nothing else.
The woman was Irene Adler, wasn't it? He admired because there were only 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman, ever outwitted him. And she outwitted him. But he was very polite to women and had, I think, not affection for them because he wasn't that kind of man. Everything to him was his work. And as Noel Coward said, emotion is so very untidy. And I think Holmes felt the same way.
In that kind of world, close and intense friendships grew up, which were based on loyalty and shared interests, and a kind of emotional dependence. The crucial thing about them is that they're non-sexual. And Freud here has a lot to answer for. Ever since Freud, all close relationships between men have been viewed as somehow sexually suspicious, which means they, on the whole, no longer exist. But this kind of relationship seems to me absolutely characteristic of the 19th century. And indeed, one writer has called the relationship between Holmes and Watson the noblest depiction of an emotional friendship between 2 men that exists in the whole of English literature.
And the strength of that friendship was to be seen when Holmes and Watson, played here by the long-running radio partnership of Carlton Hobbs and Norman Shelley, came face to face with the dastardly Killer Evans.
Well, I sure hand it to you.
Oh! Watson!
And this... you get it,
Watson, it's all right. He's unconscious. But you're not hurt, Watson. Say that you're not hurt.
It was worth a wound to know the depth of loyalty and love which lay behind the cold mask of Sherlock Holmes. When I was shot, the clear, hard eyes had dimmed for one moment. The firm lips had shaken. For the one and only time, I'd caught a glimpse of a great heart as well as a great brain. All my years of humble but single-minded service culminated in that moment of revelation.
In the various dramatisations, Holmes and Watson have faced numerous foes never dreamt of by Conan Doyle, such as the Spider-Woman and the Oxton Horror. None, however, was more terrible than Doyle's own creation, Professor Moriarty.
I've worked for years to follow 1,000 different threads, and every one of them has led to Moriarty. He's the Napoleon of crime, Watson, the secret organizer of almost everything evil that goes undetected in this great city of ours. There he sits, motionless like a spider in the center of its web, a web with 1,000 strands, and he controls them, every one.
For years I've tried to capture him, and I've come close, so very close, but each time he's narrowly evaded my grasp. No evil scheme he wouldn't concoct. No depravity he wouldn't commit. Who knows what dastardly scheme that villain may be plotting, even as we speak.
Doyle, I think, was a master of the short story, and he includes in the stories many of the typical aspects and characteristics of the 19th century.
One-legged man and a short savage, it's straight out of some penny novel.
I'll give you a few examples. The stolen jewels, the blue carbuncle, the Mazarin stone, the beryl coronet, whose return emphasises the importance of property to a settled hierarchic society.
The most stupendous, the most incredible crime of the century, the crowning act of his career. The crowning act. Crowning. Watson, the crown jewels! We're wasting time!
Then there are the stolen plans. The Bruce Partington plan, the naval treaty, the second stain. And this is all to do with the concern for the defence of the realm.
So, Watson, what do you make of all this stolen document business?
Well, it must be pretty important indeed if the Queen contacts you personally.
Her Majesty believes that unless the Redcliffe document is back in our hands by Thursday night, this country will be involved in a devastating war.
Holmes!
Her Majesty suspects the French. Now, you know my thinking, Watson. How would you proceed?
7:45 to Paris.
Bravo.
Well done, old fellow. You saved the day.
Then there are the secret societies. The Red Circle, the Ku Klux Klan, the Mafia, the Scourers. And all this reflects that school of thought about the thin crust of civilization. There was a great fear that there was only a fine line between order and chaos. And Holmes, along with many of these other heroes like Richard Hannay and Bulldog Drummond and so on, defends civilization against anarchy.
There's an east wind coming, Watson.
No, I don't think so. Looks like another warm day.
Good old Watson. The one fixed point in a changing age. There's an east wind coming all the same. Such a wind has never blew on England yet. It will be cold and bitter, Watson. And a good many of us may wither before its blast. But it's God's own wind nonetheless. And a greener, better, stronger land it will lie in the sunshine when the storm is cleared.
So enduring is the character of Sherlock Holmes that he has inspired any number of additions to the saga. His school days and his private life have been filmed, as have imagined encounters with Queen Victoria, the Loch Ness Monster, Jack the Ripper, and Sigmund Freud. There have been films about Holmes' smarter brother called Sigerson, and even a mouse detective who lives under the skirting boards of 221B Baker Street. For the fact is, Sherlock Holmes is no longer just a literary character. Orson Welles.
There are only a few of them, these permanent profiles, everlasting silhouettes on the edge of the world.
Holmes is one of that handful of characters in literature who exist outside the stories.
Geoffrey Richards.
Tarzan, Dracula, James Bond, they exist apart from their creator. They have many manifestations, many interpreters, and so they've become part of the common folklore stock, which is an enormous tribute to a creative writer.
Peter Cushing.
I think someone said that there are 4 literary characters that will live throughout time as Billy Bunter, Robinson Crusoe, Mr. Pickwick and Sherlock Holmes.
I think he's a kind of folk hero now. I think that's what he's become.
Jeremy Brett.
It's that kind of feeling from all the fan mail I get from Japan and China, that it is a kind of Bond figure to them, and a sort of Victorian Bond. And that's what made me begin to wonder. Maybe they are looking for some kind of hero to follow in some kind of way. Maybe that's what he's become, and maybe that's how he will go into the next century. I'm only guessing, I really don't know.
Holmes then has become a mythic figure, but what is the enduring appeal of the stories and the numerous entertainments which they've inspired?
I think that in the 19th century, the appeal was to Sherlock Holmes representing 2 19th century hero types. One was the scientist. In the 19th century, scientists were heroes. They've ceased to be heroes since they discovered methods of destroying the world. And also, Holmes as a latter-day Galahad, as a Galahad not in pursuit of the Holy Grail, but on the trail of murder and against the powers of darkness.
Oh, the whole atmosphere of them, I think, is so brilliant. It's like Dickens, I don't think, will ever fade. It's this wonderful power of description, of describing an age in which those people lived, that people now have a nostalgia for, because we are going through such a nostalgia age, aren't we?
In the 20th century, as that era has receded, elements that were at the time, in a sense, documentary, have come to have a romantic appeal. So, the hansom cab, gaslight, and the pea super fog, these create a background of mystery and adventure, which are, in a sense, a timeless world, because they no longer exist. The other thing, I think, which now makes them appealing is that they represent a simpler, nobler, less complex world than our own, and people find reassurance in the fact that there is still a belief in good and evil in these stories, whereas now they're relative values.
Mr. Holmes, we've admired you in the past, as does every Englishman. Your record as our greatest detective is known throughout the world. But this, seeing how you work, knowing that there is in England such a man as you, gives us all a sense of safety and security. God bless you, Mr. Holmes.
And the Sherlock Holmes phenomenon looks set to go on indefinitely, carrying us back again and again to an age of adventure and to that most famous address in all London.
221B Baker Street. Whip up, cabby.